Hello and welcome to Learning Access 2013. My name is Mike Henry and this is going to be the sixth video from Tutorial 5. In this video we're going to talk about the if statement. We're going to learn about the three parts to an if statement: the logical test, the true, and the false. And we're going to learn how to assemble that into an IIF statement. As you can see in this query, we have the last name, the first name of the patient, and then we have the parent column, and this is showing which patients are underage and their parents are actually in charge of them. So what we're going to be doing with this particular one is we're going to create a column right here that's going to take the patient's last name, put a comma and a space behind it, and then display the first name. Okay? And we've done this. You're going, Mike, we did this in the concatenation. We know how to do this. Well, we're going to throw a little bit of a monkey wrench in here, and we're basically going to say if you have a parent, so we need to check if there's a parent here, we'll display the parent's name, last name, and the comma, the first name like they have here, but after that we're going to put in parentheses the word parent. That way we know that this will be a parent who's we're looking at, and if there's not a parent tag, then it's a regular patient. So basically two things could go into this field. It could either be the parent's name in the tag, or it could be the patient's last name, first name. Whenever we're dealing with asking the computer to make a decision and pick one or the other, we call that an if statement. We call that an if statement. So the computer can pick one or the other. In other words, if statements have to be true or false, yes or no. We can't have an if statement have lots of different options in it because it won't be able to understand that. If statements can only do true and false. So let's take a look at how we're going to set this up. Right here I'm going to zoom up our field, and this field is going to be just like we called it before in the other video. We'll call it patient. Okay, so I put in here patient, and I put my colon. So now we've named our field. We're off and running. Now in the Excel world we would call this an if statement, and we type IF. But unfortunately in the database world we do it a little bit different. We put an IIF, and that stands for an immediate if statement. We're going to run this statement every time there's a record, so it gets run immediately each time we display the record. So it's an immediate if statement. Like all functions, it has an opening and a closing parenthesis. We haven't put the closing one in yet, but we just opened it up. Now with if statements there's three parts to them. There's the logical test, and then if the logical test is true you go to the true part, and if it's not true you go to the false. So a logical test, a true, and a false. So the first thing that we're going to do is the logical test. Ask the question, is the parent field empty? And we have a special function for that. It's called isNull. So I put in here is null, and then like every function it has to have an opening parenthesis. I hate starting our first if statement with an is null, but that's the way the book is showing us, and I want to follow what the book is doing. So basically we say is null, and then in those parentheses we say the field parent. So if the field parent is empty, that means true. So you'll notice I put a comma in here. This says the question is done and we get to move on to the true. And I had the true already pre-set up in my clipboard because we've done this before. Last name glued to the comma and a space, which is then glued to the first name. So that's our true. If the parent is empty, the true is you do the patient's name. Notice I put another comma. This is switching me from the true to the false. And so now for the false, what we're doing is we're saying take the field parent. So I'm going to put in here the field parent, and I'm going to glue that. So I drop in a little ampersand glue there, and what I'm going to glue that to is some text. I put in a space, I put in an open parenthesis, and then I put in the word parent. Close my parenthesis and then put a closing quote. So I'm taking whatever in the parent field and gluing it to a space, open parenthesis, parent, close parenthesis. Now with my false done, I can close off my if statement here. I hit OK, and I go ahead and view this. So as you look at this, you can see that these first ones have parents, and then right behind them is the parent's name. We take that and move it right over and put in the space and the parent. Here, this one does not have a parent. You can see that we take this last name and this first name and put them together. So it's really important to understand we're building that with an if statement. We then could get rid of all three fields here. So again, this right here is null. The parent, that's our logical test. That's our question. We have a comma that separates this, and then we go to here, last name concatenated to the comma, the space, and the first name. That's our true. And then here, that is our false. We're taking the parent and concatenating it to the tag parent. If statements always have the three parts: logical test, a true, and a false. So when we look at this query here, you can see that we have the patient, whether the invoice has been paid or not. We can see the check boxes for yes or no, and then we have the invoice amount. Now basically what we're going to be doing with this query is we're going to be creating a field right here that's going to show the invoice amount plus a late fee. Okay, basically if they have not paid yet, we're going to add a $10 late fee to them. That's all we're going to do here, is just add $10. Now you might be saying, where did this come from? This looks like the query we just created a few minutes ago. Yes, it is, and I want to show you how we're going to use the results of one query in the beginning of another query here. So let's go back and look at the design view. You can see that the query that we created before is being used, and the query that we created before was this one right here. Let me just open this real quick. Let me find it. Here it is. And what you can see here is I just took the query and removed the first name, last name parts of it and gave the ID and the patient's name here. The query is still exactly the same as before. We have not changed that part of it. So what we're doing is we're taking the results of one query and dumping them into another query, and that's what we get for this patient name. This allows us to show the patient name, and then from this table the two things that we want. So now let's look at the actual query that we're going to create here. So I'm going to zoom this up, and we'll just call this new field. We'll call it with late fee. With late fee. And now we've got this named. Now what we really need to do is check whether the invoice paid box is checked or not. And we do that with an IIF. So we do IIF. Now the great thing about the invoice paid field is that's a checkbox, and that's already either a positive or a negative, a yes or a no, a true or a false. So in this case all we have to do is put the name of the field in there. So we put the field name in here called invoice paid, and that's already a true or a false. And if it's true, it's been checked, it's going to send us over to here, and what we're going to display for this new late fee is 0. They don't have to pay anything. They've already paid their bill. But for the people who have not checked their box, they haven't paid their bill, they're going to get their invoice amount. So we're going to take the invoice amount. We'll take the field called invoice amount, and what we're going to do is we're going to add $10 to that. Now I close my parenthesis here, so I have a closing parenthesis here. So we have invoice paid, that's my true, or excuse me, my logical test, which will either send me to a true or false based on whether it's checked. If it is true, we go to 0, no one owes anyone anything. If it is false, we go to here, we take the invoice amount and add $10. So now when we run this query, you can see that this person has a checked box. They don't have a late fee, that they don't have an invoice anymore, basically. This person here did not have a checked box, $250, we added $10 to it. So this gives us that capability. Check boxes are one of the best fields for doing the if statements on, because you already have an automatic true and a false. So now we've played with the if statement. We learned that there's three parts to the if statement: the logical test, the true, and the false. We learned that we can take that logical test, the true and the false, and put them in the right order, and it'll give us an IIF statement, or an immediate if. And then we saw two different kinds. One where we used a function in our logical test to test if something was empty, an is null. And then the second one we took a look at, we learned that one of the greatest fields that you have for doing these is the checkbox. And that checkbox is a great field because it already is true or false, yes or no. So we can use that directly in our logical test and go right straight forward with it.